Okay, so if I just hit this button here, I reckon episode 2 will begin and Gordon Dundas will appear. I don't know if this is going to work. Episode 2!
Hello!
Oh, he is! He is on the other end of the line.
That's amazing. That is amazing.
Everybody should have a button like this, Gordon. You know. I've said it in one of the interviews I've conducted. You know, sometimes technology is with you, sometimes it's against you.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct.
How have you been this week?
Yeah, I've been good actually. Yeah, no, life is good. It's still an odd scenario that we're all living in, but we've got a lot going on at the moment, and we're coming into, I think it's still going to be a really busy time of the year, the last 3 months of the year, really. So, we would normally be, Gordon, travelling around the world at this point. We know that September, October, November, and then probably into the second week of December is pretty busy at this point. But not this year. Pretty much everything's been sort of postponed, unfortunately.
Is there any whisky festivals happening anywhere?
I don't really think so. I mean, I think there's still ones that are technically on, but I don't think they'll actually, in the end, actually come through and happen. I mean, I think it's just, it's really, really difficult, because if you go to a whisky show, it's not about social distancing, what is, but I mean, it's not about wearing masks. It's such a convivial thing, and it's such a meeting up with your friends, sharing experiences, catching up, trying new whiskies, going to classes, all these things, and it's a social event more than anything, actually. So I think it's it just wouldn't particularly work very well, I think, if you've socially distanced and people have got masks on. And personally, I don't know what you think. You've been to many as well.
Yeah, I have actually. And the Whisky Unscripted Season 2, Episode 2, I thought we'd have a look at tourism, whisky travel. Just as a little theme, Gordon, just try it out. And that is a very good theme to hit there, because you do, and so do I, travel around. I'm more Europe, you're more the world, seeing places. And one thing that I have absolutely loved is you jump on a strange plane, strange train, strange bus, get to a strange hotel, then you walk into the hall where the whiskies, and suddenly you're among friends drinking whiskey, and it's like you're just down the road.
It's like your family, isn't it? It's like going back to your family.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. And yeah, we hope we get back to that as soon as possible. And whisky tourism is a great thing to talk about at the moment, because, I think it's got to a point that whisky tourism is so important to Scotland, but far less other countries, that it's worth that we've got some great people on to talk about it. Before we go any further, Gordon,
yes,
what are you drinking today?
That's a fantastic question, and we don't do a lot of research for this show, but I did. And you mentioned
what?
This whiskey.
Sorry. Whoa, roll that back a bit. Sorry. Did you just say you'd done some preparation for this?
Did a couple of mouse clicks, about 5 minutes ago, to work out. I thought Gordon has mentioned this whiskey in the last series. So I clicked a couple of buttons, and I think you mentioned this whiskey on episode 10 with Katie Muggeridge, the Rosebank and Glengoyne brand manager. You were doing a quiz, and it was about a Lowland whiskey. Do you remember?
Yeah, Lowland whiskey.
I mean, none of us could get it. What?
I'm just trying to think. Was it an Auchentoshan?
No.
It was a Lowland whiskey,
and we couldn't get it. So I came across my desk. I thought, I'll have that, and I'll wait until I'm on with Gordon, and it's a Bladnoch.
Oh, a Bladnoch. Yeah.
Remember? You did
it. Yeah, I did mention that. Yeah. Down near Dumfries area.
Yes, and I think
lovely distillery. Now it's owned by an Australian gentleman. Sorry.
Well, just my notes there, it said Nick Savage from Macallan has come down to oversee the production.
Right. Okay.
Of Bladnoch. Yeah. So I've got in my hand here 46.7% ABV, the Bladnoch 10-year-old. I'm holding it up, and quite clearly it's bourbon barrels. It's a lovely, sort of lighter colour whiskey. The tasty notes talk of Parma violets and apples, and I wouldn't go far away from the apples. It's a lovely, floral, light, very sippable, very lovely 10-year-old whiskey.
Nice. I haven't tried Bladnoch for. I mean, I went down there probably about 10 years ago, when it was owned by a gentleman called Raymond Armstrong, and but it's now owned by an Australian gentleman. They've repackaged it, they've invested heavily in it, and it's great. No, I haven't tasted it though. What's it like?
It's not, again, that little extra strength there, 46.7%. I don't have it on the bottle. It's a little miniature. That could be an unchilled filtered one, Gordon. But yeah,
probably
it is
fresh,
I would say. Even in the palate, very clean. But a lovely wee bit of that oak. Nice little bit at the back of my tongue there. Yeah, fruity. Yeah, it's a very lovely drink. The Bladnoch 10. I'll be adding a wee bit of water to that to see how that goes. Nice. What have you got?
Well, and I did a tasting last night with Whisky Base in Holland, and I've got a little bit of a sample left from that I thought this is too good not to drink on Whisky Unscripted.
So just paint the picture. Who's Whisky Base for people that don't know?
Whisky Base. It's a community basically based in Holland who they have fans around the world, so you can buy whiskey from them. You can do tastings with them. There's a store in Rotterdam, and we did a tasting on their YouTube channel last night on Glengoyne and Tamdhu, and I had a Glengoyne in a bourbon cask, which is pretty rare. That didn't last long, so that one's gone. We did the cask strength and the 21-year-old as well, so just to really show three dimensions of Glengoyne. Then we did Tamdhu 15, and then we sort of deconstructed that by looking at an American and a European oak sherry cask. So I've got a little bit of the American oak sherry cask sample that we used, which is, wait till I tell you this. This is it's an American oak sherry hogshead, 65.8% alcohol. Yeah, strong. But I didn't need to. I mean, I'm drinking that without any water, and it really doesn't taste of 65.8. Beautiful whiskey, but really different to a European oak hogshead.
So, Gordon,
and that's why we wanted to talk about it.
They're putting it in. What would be the filling strength then? Because a lot of filling strength is 63%, but you're drinking something at 65.
Absolutely, and at Tamdhu we now do 63.5, as do most proprietary distilleries. But these were filled obviously at a higher strength, so probably close to off the still strength, which would be 69, 70, something like that. And they have obviously been really, really good casks, because there's not a lot of Angel's Share particularly or strength leaked out of those potentially, but we can tell by the strength. But and that would have been done really for mainly the reason to actually save on warehouse space. If you're filling it close to 70 rather than 63.5, you're actually filling 10% less casks, or if you know what I mean. And that's one of the reasons it was done.
Is there any danger, though? Whiskey. I have read, is there any danger if it's too high alcohol, it can not have the maturation effect, or it can burn the wood?
Yeah, look, I think it depends on the spirit and a whole range of different things. Yeah. But I mean, I don't think necessarily having whiskey at 65.8, apart from trying to describe a difference, which we did during this tasting, is most cask strength whiskies are normally under 60, and it's very rare to see whiskies at this high strength. But for what we were trying to do last night, it made a lot of sense. And actually, in the end, what I then did was I poured a little bit of the two casks together, the European oak and the American oak, and wow, what a combination, because you've got two really different styles of sherry casks. So that's what we were trying to do. I'm drinking the American oak, which is just fabulous, absolutely fabulous. So
that would be very similar to Sandy McIntyre's manager's choice. Would that be right?
Yeah, no,
Single Cask last year.
Yeah, an American oak, probably a little bit higher strength than his, but I know Sandy's a big fan of American oak Tamdhu, whereas Ian Whitecross, his distillery assistant manager, is a European. The cask this year is a European oak, and if you have them side by side, the colour is different, the taste is really different. So that's what I'm drinking. It's fabulous. 65.8%. Bang. Hello. Morning.
Yes, I thought here's me at 46.7, but that will be fine for the time that we're recording this. Gordon, you are tasked most days to try and see if there's any whiskey news that has happened. And before you even talk about news out there in the world, could we start with ourselves? Because we have got a new email and we have got a YouTube channel. That's news for me.
Yeah, that is news. You can get in touch with us. We might even start doing competitions and things. You never know.
That'd be great.
I mean, I'll make sure that we speak to the brand teams and see if we can get whiskies sent out to people if they prove that they've been listening,
Yeah.
and manage to waste 30 minutes of their lives listening to us.
And sadly, there's no shipping to certain countries, but we can always keep it for you.
No,
when
we
you
can
come,
always keep
we'll drink it with you.
We'll keep it at room temperature in the sauna, and it'll be here for you. So that's fine. So yeah, we're now on Instagram, we're now on YouTube, and we'll be doing videos and things when we start travelling, which will supplement what we're doing here. And we have an email address, which is whiskyunscripted@ianmcleod.com. So you can get in touch with us on Instagram, you can get in touch with us on email. So if you get anything that you're desperate to find out, we can always look it up and tell you.
Yeah.
Or if you want to know more about the whiskey inside the whiskey industry, God, I really want to know about something like, I really want to know about the bottling. How about the bottling? We can probably speak to somebody from our bottling hall. So there's a lot that we could talk about. So yeah, get in touch.
That would be good. It'd be good to sort of get people's opinion on whiskey, and one of the questions I'd be asking is about whiskey tourism, but we'll keep that just up our sleeves. Gordon, have you any news out there from the wider world?
I do have some news. Quite a few things been going on. I think one of the things that was great to see was that a very good friend of mine, someone I've not seen for a wee while, I think I last saw him was in San Francisco last year, possibly, Mickey Heads, who's a bit of a legend in the Isla distilling community, and the manager of Ardbeg, is going to retire. So Colin Gordon, who I believe is Lagavulin distillery manager, is going to take over from the legend that is Mickey Heads, who's retiring. So he's going to retire in October. I'm probably not going to see him. So Mickey, we want to just say it's been a pleasure to have travelled and drunk whiskey with you at times, and we wish you a happy retirement, sir. Brilliant. So that's the other thing that I noticed and picked up on was, now it's a story that if I'm honest, I clicked on it this morning and I thought this is worth talking about. I'd like to mention a man called Matthew Robson. Yep, Matthew Robson.
Never heard of him.
What seems to have happened, that his father, Pete, had bought him a bottle of whiskey every year to celebrate his birthday. Nice. So since 1992, his dad, Pete, had bought a bottle of whiskey every year, and it was some Macallans. And I think he'd probably in all spent about £5,000 on the whiskey, but they're thinking of selling it for around about £40,000. So
you never touched them?
No, they're all. I mean, unbelievable. I mean, there'd be none left. But no. If it was me, but. Yeah, I mean, that's a great story. It just shows you that, how the whiskey can be, if you play that game, can be a bit of an investment in a world that's a little bit sort of uncertain at the moment.
I'm writing that down, Gordon, for a future themed episode. Because I think the heat has come off of it a little bit, but for a while there was stories about people making fabulous returns, more return than gold, for example. I was reading some headlines, and selling it in the morning for X amount, or buying it in the morning for X amount, selling it in the afternoon for even more. But I think the heat isn't out of that, but that would be a good thing. We've got friends in auction houses, that'd be quite a nice thing to get into.
It's like all of these things, Gordon. It's like all investments. You've got to buy at the right price. You've got to sell at the right price. You've got to buy the right thing at the right price. So not all whiskies will be a great investment. But the best thing about whiskey is that if it's not, you can just drink it. Yeah. And that's the point. You can't drink gold, or you can't drink a house. At least with whiskey you can drink it. So if it doesn't reach the heights that you were hoping, and it, fine, just drink it and enjoy it.
Yeah, so and that's another thing for our email address, our contact us. It'd be quite nice to hear. People do have that special bottle in their house that they're keeping. There's quite a lot of people have that, and I've spoke to them. So if you have a special bottle that you're maybe keeping for maybe that big payday, it'd be nice to hear what you're keeping.
Absolutely, yeah, no, definitely, absolutely correct.
Now, Gordon, I was going to point to our main interview of the show was from Susan Morrison, and it's about whisky tourism. I just was quite keen to see, where we are at the moment, how it's going to go forward. But how did we get to where we were? Are you a man that likes to go around and do a bit of the tourism? Because I remember in last season you asked Sandy McIntyre, does he ever go undercover? Mm-hmm. Now, can I ask you that question, Gordon? Do you ever strap on the man bag or the bum bag, on with a pair of shorts? look like a tourist and go into distillery?
I've been to a few, but I've generally been. I don't particularly go. I mean, I'm not. Wouldn't call myself not that well known in whiskey. But I think the point is that I would go in, and it's nice to go and just see how other brands do it. And I think that's really strong at Glengoyne. The guys at Glengoyne are very conscious of going to see how other brands do it. So I remember them going up to Macallan and one or two other things. And I think that's really, really important because, you know, the best thing about the whiskey industry is there's no real competition. It's all about working together, promoting whiskey. That's why it is so successful, from tourism to, you know, to the actual tastings and things like that. So, you know, obviously it's been a tough time, and a lot of distilleries are still closed or just opening up and things like that. But it's been a really tough year. So we hope that it bounces back next year. But I think the point is that we have. You know, we have a great resource at Glengoyne, which can, you know, for a small distillery has how many 90,000 visitors, something like that.
Yeah,
normally.
Last year, I think Karen Cornfield will be hearing from later on. She's the operations director at Ian MacLeod and is tasked with looking after Glengoyne. I think it was 70 to 75,000 last year.
And that's the point, is we need to. You know, that generates a nice bit of income. So Karen, I'm sure, will talk about that. But yeah, I mean, I think there's some great distillery tours. I mean, I love going to Islay. Isla's, I mean, that's, you know, Islay is a wonderful. If you've never been to Islay, strongly recommend going to Islay. Of course, always come to Glengoyne as well. But then, of course, you know, that your Speyside as well, the Speyside Whisky Festival, great time to go and visit Speyside. A little bit less smoky than Islay, but
I know, it's fantastic.
Yeah, no, I mean,
I had a couple of good nights in the Speyside Festival doing the
definitely,
Tamdhu opens for. It's like Brigadoon, the movie. The village appears once in 100 years. Tamdhu appears once every 2 days, every year at the Speyside Festival, and what a time we have up there. If you get a ticket, that really is, I would say, out of most things happening up there, that's really a golden ticket.
No, absolutely. But I think tell you what, I haven't seen Susan for a while, so I'm looking forward to listening to Susan from the Scotch Whisky Experience talk to us about whisky tourism, and I guess one or two of the challenges that are going on at the moment.
She does indeed. Gordon, you couldn't be there at the interview, but just what you've said there, could you, while we're listening to this, our new feature, Listillery, so you just take the D off the distillery and put an L there, Listillery, could you put together a little list of how to put on the ultimate whisky weekend road trip?
Yes.
You know, where to go. You've got 2 days, anywhere in Scotland, money's no object. So the Dundas Listillery about whisky road trips. So listen, that'd be great if you could do that. And here's Susan Morrison of the Scottish Whisky Experience, and she's the chair of ASVA, which you'll hear about as well. So take it away.
What's ASVA?
The Association for Scottish Visitor Attractions. Every visitor attraction in the land, part of this organisation, and she's in charge of it. So a very important lady who's got her pulse on tourism and, for my purposes, whisky tourism. Here's what happens. Susan, thanks for joining us. And really, the theme of today's podcast is about tourism. And I just wanted to maybe talk about what it was like before. And I was going over some of the old archival stuff from the Glengoyne archives, and I think about the late 60s, people started turning up at distilleries, and with Tamdhu, I think we've got the visitor centre opening at the railway 76, but it must have been quite basic back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't open until 88. But yeah, absolutely. I think when we opened, there were very few distilleries that welcomed visitors. There were ones that would show you around if you pitched up at the door, but I think it was mainly Glenfiddich, who I think they opened their visitor centre around 69, so they were at the tail end of the 60s. But it was difficult to get a whisky experience at that time. Much as there are great characters in the industry, and I'm sure some of the impromptu tours were hilarious, but yes, it didn't really kick off. It was really the late 80s before whisky tourism even started to kind of raise its head.
Well, that's a great point, because we talked about the Glengoyne, it was people booking up to get taken around individually, but yet you've been in it from the start at the Scottish Whisky Experience. So what was the late 80s like as an industry? I mean, I would take it tourism, it'd be golf, it'd be castles, but why did the pressure build for the whisky experience to be started?
I think it was just the then managing director, Alistair McIntosh, had been speaking. He was the MD of William Muir's, the bottling plant down in Leith, and obviously he spoke to a lot of the chief execs in the industry, and I think at one point he'd actually said, maybe we should have a whisky experience of some kind in either Glasgow or Edinburgh, because at the time only 20% of visitors went further north than Stirling. So really, if they were going to get to some of the few distilleries that did welcome visitors, there was only 20% going that far. So I think it came out of that, and the industry very quickly got behind Alistair and said, absolutely, this is a good idea. Why didn't we think of it before? And then, fortuitously, they came across this site right next to Edinburgh Castle, the biggest paid-for attraction in Scotland. So I think they thought, well, this is the place to be. And
it's absolutely amazing, Susan. And if no one's been there, you must make and most people do that love whisky, make a beeline for the Scottish whisky experience. So it starts in 88, and how was the birth and then the growth of the experience? And from your ASVA hat on, whisky tourism in general, did it start to grow straight away, or was there problems?
No, I think it took a bit of time. I mean, certainly, I think in our first year we saw about 70,000 visitors. We're now up at close to 400,000. Clearly not this year, Gordon, but in 2019 and hopefully going forward around the 400,000 mark. So no, back in the day it was slow to get going. But I think it was the right move to get something in either Glasgow or Edinburgh as the kind of gateways to Scotland at the time, particularly for the international visitors. So, I mean, today, what has been consistent is our mix of visitors. So from the start, it was pretty much 80% international, and today it is still 80% international, with the exception of the last few months.
Yes, absolutely. I did say it was castles and golf courses. Was that what was out there? With your ASVA hat on, was that
pretty
really what
much
you came to Scotland for?
With my ASVA hat on, pretty much. Although I think, to be fair, Scotch whisky has generally featured on a tick list, but just because, people, it was so difficult to get out to a distillery. I think people generally ticked off the whisky box by just visiting one of the pubs in the cities and speaking to the barman about whisky, which, I mean, we discovered quite early on was probably not the thing to do in terms of getting correct information. I mean, things have definitely changed, and social media and everything has helped with whisky knowledge, but back in the day, asking the barman questions about whisky was probably not the way to go.
It's amazing when people think that's just 1988. I mean, I was hardly born in that year, but you were on another podcast, and we've had them on here before, the Glencairn guys, and that lovely glass is only 20 years old. I mean, we're not talking big history here. It's amazing that this whisky tourism, the Glencairn, is quite relatively recent.
It is, absolutely. But I think we saw a big step change about 11 years ago, and suddenly the numbers leapt, and there was definitely more of an interest to maybe tour around and visit several distilleries rather than just tick off a box of I've been to one. So I think that's the point. It kind of changed.
So 2008, 2009,
yeah,
roughly?
2008, 2009, I think that was the big step change.
And what was that? Just a sort of appreciation? There was more books out there, more magazines out there, more media circulating the globe, talking about Scotch, would you say?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely helped. I think the popularity of Scotch whisky generally grew, so people were more conscious of it. I think the malts were going, there was more of an interest in the malts and the diversity of the malts, and that then drew people back to, the provenance of where Scotch whisky from, Scotland, where about in Scotland. And then I think, Scotland has such stunning landscape, and the distilleries are all sitting in that landscape, that I think it ticked lots of boxes for lots of tourists coming to the country. So yeah, I think it's gradually grown through all the information, and it's much easier to get hold of information about whisky now with all the digital stuff, but the rise of the popularity of Scotch, and then the fact that Scotland is just a brilliant country to visit, has just all helped with moving visitors around the country to visit different distilleries.
Oh, no, it's been great. And on that point, what were they coming for? And who was doing it well?
Who was it? Do you know, I meet with all the distillery visitor centres twice a year, and obviously your team are at that too. And the people remain in the industry, so it's the same people that are around, and obviously fresh blood comes in, but the same people, and they're such characters, and we're all, in it to provide the best experience for visitors. And I think, I don't have a statistic on this, but I'm pretty sure that the biggest number of 5-star attractions within Scotland they're all whisky related. So generally distilleries. So we have a very high number of 5-star visitor experiences amongst our sector within the attraction sector.
I think you've hit the finger right on it there. It is about people, isn't it? And there's some great characters in the whisky industry, and that's what people really want to come and...
Yeah, it's absolutely,
experience.
And it's the stories. They love the stories behind the distilleries, and they love the characters who make the whisky, and the chance to meet these people. So yeah, I think it is absolutely all about the people.
Is that where the future lies in stories? Reading a little bit about whisky tourism and where it can go. Maybe started off very sort of descriptive and very process heavy, but there's another area really to move into. And I know some people are doing it already, but you've mentioned storytelling. Is that a big growth area?
I think absolutely. We launched a product last year called Tasting Tales, and it's basically whisky food matching, but each whisky we go into stories about the characters and the distillery behind that particular whisky, and people just love it. They just love hearing about the little stories and the human touches, and I think that's what brings whisky to life for people.
It's amazing. What's the numbers? We should maybe cover this off at the beginning, Susan, but I've got no script in front of me. But, you're talking about people coming here and engaging with those lovely tasting tales, but what are the approximate numbers of before 2020?
Well, across the whisky industry, we saw last year over 2 million visits to distilleries or whisky attractions like ourselves. And that sits only at number 2 next to Edinburgh Castle being the biggest visited attraction in Scotland. So if you take the whisky attractions as 1, we sit there as number 2.
Wow, it's quite an amazing story of success of whisky getting brought out to the world, because these people are going away back home and spreading the gospel as well as the liquid wherever they come from. And countries of the world who's coming from where?
Well, consistently the US has always been one of our top visitors, along with English. So English and US make up about 17-18% each of our visitors. They're closely followed by the French, and then in the last 5 years the Chinese have become number 3. So I was saying earlier to a colleague, it's amazing. Our Scottish visitors were only 5%. But obviously in this new COVID situation with staycations, the one thing that has been lovely downstairs, and I've actually managed to do 2 tours, again, I've gone back to guiding, and it was just been lovely to have some Scots on tour, because generally we do not see very many Scottish visitors through our doors, but it's been great to see them coming through. But actually traditionally it is the US, and then as I say, over the last 5 years the Chinese have really soared up to number 3.
Wow, that's amazing, and hopefully we'll get more Scots through the door. And certainly I did see not a lot, but you put on a wonderful distillers fair between Christmas and New Year. And I did speak to some guys from Bowness last year, and I think maybe the fact there was lots of free whisky and food sloshing around, it seemed to stay for quite a lot. Those Scots found that fair.
I know that it appeals to the Scotsman, I think, the distillers fair.
Susan, before you go, just we've mentioned COVID, they mentioned 2020. We can't go without talking about what the impact has been. Could you just outline that, and maybe more where do you think we'll get back, or when will we get back to what has gone before?
Oh, if only I had a crystal ball. I think that's the frustrating element. I think people have generally dealt with this extremely well. I think it's the fact that it's just ongoing and there doesn't appear to be a finite date that is making people become a bit weary of it now. But as I say, our hope in the industry is that we will see internationals back spring next year. Having said that, there are already some internationals around. I mentioned I'd taken a couple of tours recently, and I had a couple of Italians, had a couple of German lads who were going off to go down the distilleries. So there is a desire to get back to travel, but clearly, and until it's safe to do so, I don't think we're going to see the volumes back. But I would hope, all being well, that by spring next year we start to get back to more normality within the tourism sector in Scotland.
And has there been many casualties?
Yeah, there have been, and it has been a really, really hard, and my 30 years in tourism, there's never been anything as challenging as this, and we have had challenges, and it has been really hard to hear some of the stories coming from some of the attractions where they literally don't know whether they're going to make it to the end of the next week. So it's really hard when suddenly the tap's turned off and there's absolutely no income coming through your door. And obviously with the 2 metre ruling just now for attractions, it's still making it really difficult to break even, never mind make a profit. So I think we're not through the woods yet. We're still in a kind of survival mode. We've pretty much lost most of the summer season, which means we're going back into winter season, and all attractions make their money in the high season. So it is a very challenging time, and I really hope there is enough support out there to see everybody through this. Because it would be devastating to Scotland if it lost any of its gems, whether they're whisky attractions or other attractions. It would be awful to lose that rich tapestry that offers visitors so much when they visit.
Oh, I know, absolutely. As you say, we can only hope that we can try and get some of our own through these doors. And one of the great ways of doing that is going to the ASVA website, which has got virtually every tourist attraction in there. And it's a wonderful resource.
Yes, it's a great resource, and it's a great way just now especially to find out maybe what the slightly different opening hours or different approaches that attractions are taking to making it a very safe visit for visitors. So it's a great website to visit if you want to check out who's open, when they're open, and how to get booked.
Great. I don't want to keep you. I know you're very, very busy with reopening and all that, Susan. What we'd love to do, myself and Gordon Dundas, who passes on his apologies for not being here, would love to, go from the tourism part just to have a lovely chat with you in the Scottish Whisky Experience one day.
That would be great. We'd love to have you back here. We're all about people, so it's been quite hard only seeing people on screens and not seeing people up close. And that's what's great about having opened the doors last week. It's great to see people coming in and having fun again. So we will welcome you at any point you would like to come through.
That's exactly it. I thought the show would go roughly like myself and Gordon roll up to the bar and relieve you of some whiskies. I thought that might be the sort of idea or the thrust of that show.
Well, it's always better to have a chat over a dram.
It's one of the must be the best views in Edinburgh, or the best bar with the best views in Edinburgh you've got up there. I don't know if many folk know about that. It's amazing.
We've got 2 bars, Gordon, so we're not short of whiskey.
That's okay. I thought we'd seen double the last. That's solved that one. Susan Morrison, thank you so much for joining us on the Whisky Unscripted, and we will speak again. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Gordon.
Well, that was Susan Morrison there. Quite an important job she's got on her hands over the next few months, Gordon.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It'd be interesting to see how things move in the tourism industry and how people move around the planet in the next few months. But I think things can only ultimately get better. Let's hope. So that's great. One
of the facts that just stood out for me, and maybe it will change. She was saying that by their stats at the Scottish Whisky Experience, up until COVID and the coronavirus, 5% were Scots going in the building. 95% people from around the world. So hopefully maybe that will start to change and the percentages might improve from the Scottish side of things. But that was
Yeah, I
interesting.
think that's probably fair. I mean, I think, you know, if you think of it where they're located in Edinburgh as well, right next to the castle, it's a fantastic location and a great place to showcase whiskey. And actually, it's the Scotch Whisky Experience is actually sort of owned by the industry, as it were. So it's a really interesting place to visit if you've never been. Scottish, English, wherever you're from, go and see it. Fantastic.
Yeah, and another point that you brought up last episode was snackage. And when we do the Distillers Fair, Susan mentioned that in the interview, their food in there that they give people like ourselves is absolutely fantastic. It really is.
Is it right? I'll be doing that next year then.
You know,
Yep.
this is. I was going to mention this, Gordon, but I actually was on holiday. I had an official holiday on the 29th of December last year, and then I got a call saying, you know, would you go to do the Distillers Fair at the Scottish Whisky Experience? And I thought, of course I'll go. But the reason I said yes was because of the food. What a lunch. Anyway, that's just, you know, that's just by the by. And we've got
absolutely.
Karen Confield coming up later on in Whisky Unscripted, who will talk about the actual feet in the ground at Glengoyne, how it's physically happening to a distillery. So that's coming up later on. But Gordon, where are we going next?
Well, can I just say, I mean, this doesn't happen at all. I don't think it's really happened at all. But back by popular demand. Now, I was actually speaking to somebody who I think listened to an episode, and he was wondering what letter we were on in our A to Zs, and for me that's popular demand. We need to go back to that. I think everybody's desperate to work out where we're at, and we know we're on letter M.
Hit the music!
So,
okay.
M.
Start. This should be this. I'm hoping this will be quite easy. Well, I've got a few historical ones, but I am going to go for. I think we have to go for malts. You know, our industry in Scotland needs malted barley. Without that, it's not Scotch whisky. So that lovely malts, the barley that you take in from the fields into what now is mostly an industrial factory, and they do it for the industry. We use Simpsons, and they take in the green malt and malt it using, and I've been there, I've been to crisp maltings. So malts, without it we would not have Scotch whisky. Whereas in other parts of the world, Ireland, there can be unmalted barley in the mash bill, or in America it can be corn or rye, but we need that lovely malted barley. And I suppose, Gordon, that was what we had in this country. People ask why malt? Well, there was not much else growing here in the 12, 13, 1400s. That was a very hardy strain of vegetation, whereas wheat down south in England would survive their climate, may not survive as much up here. We needed something hardy, and that barley, or B-E-R-E as it was called, that strain, was what we used to make our beer, which then became whisky, and that's now passed into the laws. Is that not roughly the case?
Absolutely, and I think the thing is that actually malted barley, it has this wonderful ability to, it has a thing called diastatic power, and that's what it's all about, enzymes, and that's why malted barley is actually used in the production of bourbon as well, and it's used in the production of grain whiskey, because you need those enzymes to create, basically, to help create the fermentable sugar. That's what you need to do. So that's why every mash bill in America has a percentage of malted barley. Generally, it's about 70% corn, 15% rye, and 15% malted barley. The malted barley is really, really important, and that's the point, and that's why you need that diastatic power. But if you don't have any malted barley, maybe you're making 100% corn whiskey, you need to add enzymes to create that basically the conversion into sugar, and that's so that's why malted barley is so good. And
you need that for the yeast, so it can feed. Is that right? So
correct. You need the sugar then for the yeast to produce alcohol and carbon dioxide. Yep.
Wow. So M for malts, Gordon. What have you got?
Mash bill as well. Yeah. I've got a couple of brands I wanted to talk about. I think, we've been talking a bit about this recently, is well, not on here, but just generally is blended malt whiskey, which is malt whiskies from around Scotland blended together, so blended malt. pretty small category. I think it's going to be a category that's going to grow because I think people understand the point of mixing blends together when you look at the mixing malts together when you look at the diversity of single malts around Scotland, and I think it's an area that people will start to understand more. Monkey Shoulder is probably the biggest brand out there, but I think the key point about Monkey Shoulder, it is a brand. It doesn't particularly talk about the whiskies that goes into it, but it's a brilliant brand, big brand, done a lot in the on-trade globally, and really has got people drinking. You know, they drink Monkey Shoulder. It's a bit like Jack Daniels. They drink Jack Daniels. They don't particularly know too much about it in terms of its cask, so they just drink it because they like it. And Monkey Shoulder's in that area as well. So it's a brand that's done very well. Probably the largest blended malt, but it plays a very different game to one or two other more sort of provenance-driven blended malts.
Well, I tell you what, Gordon, I'm still thinking about it, and we are. This programme is brought to you by Ian MacLeod, and one of the whiskies I remember very vividly and fondly was the Six Isles that I tasted last season on Whisky Unscripted. That's 6 islands in Scotland, all their single malts put together. And you talk about provenance. My goodness, that was what a dram that is.
You could pretty much guess most of the distilleries that are in that whiskey. So, I mean, whereas many other blended malts are not like that. So that's a great example of a different style of blended malt. The other one I just wanted to bring up, I knew I brought this up before, but is Mortlach. Quite a famous sort of meteor style whiskey, 2.81 distillation. I've mentioned this before.
Go and explain that one, please.
There's probably a complicated diagram on the internet that you can look at and not understand. But that's Mortlach, quite a famous and sought after brand.
Because I think in their label, Gordon, they make a big deal of the reflux going up. You know, well, literal reflux. The vapour carries over the line arm rapidly, if I'm not much mistaken, on their label. And that's and at Glengoyne, and even at Tamdhu, we're trying to encourage the reflux. They're wanting to get the vapour over quickly to get that characteristic.
And that's the point. Every distillery does what suits them, and you know we can talk about what we do at Glengoyne and Tamdhu, and other people can talk. You know, if you distill in a way that suits you. We want to develop a different style by doing it the way we do it. So there's no right or wrong way. You can't say this is the way you would distill, because a distillery that wants to create something different would do it in a different way. So yeah, absolutely. Yes. Any other M's?
I'd like to go there. Some historical M's, if I may, Gordon.
Historical M's.
You know, I like my historical. I've got a little list, but I'll just run through them very quickly. Just mention about Glengoyne, our second proprietor. There's a big story behind it. Not so much owner at Glengoyne was McClellan, I should say, not with a D in the end. And he takes over from our founder, George Connell. So McClellan comes in 1851/52, and his son takes over before the Lang brothers famously purchased the distillery in 76. Another M is a gentleman called Patrick McGovern, who's a molecular archaeologist. I call him the Indiana Jones of booze, from the University of, it's not Minnesota, it's Minneapolis, I think it is. And he has researched some of the ancient strains of barley and the ancient strains of drink, taking the early alcohol back to around about 8,000 years BC, when humans started drinking and domesticating wheat and cereals to make alcohol, around about 8,000. And he postulates that possibly distilling comes in about 3,500 years BC. So Patrick McGovern, quite a influential molecular archaeologist. And we've got M for merger, 1925, when the huge Johnny Walker empire merges with the Dewar and Buchanan empire, and then the Haigs join together to create DCL, which will become Diageo. 1925, the second biggest corporate merger pre-war of all time. Massive amounts of money there as well. And I suppose one last one, if you can let me have this one, Masataka Takatsuru M. I know it's his first name. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Pioneer of Japanese whiskey.
Yes, so there you go. There's some historical M's.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Very interesting one. I never met him, so I don't know if he was an interesting man. But, married a Scottish lady, took all that knowledge back to Japan, worked initially with some Shinjo Tori, and then created Nika after that. So, yeah, great story. Great. Well, I think we've satisfied the A to Z fans out there.
I think we have. Gordon satisfied the A to Zs. Now, we've got an interview coming up shortly with Cairn cornfields.
Yes.
But I did set a challenge about the distillery, about tourism as a sort of theme of these episodes. Have you got the ultimate list if you had to put together a weekend road trip?
Yeah, well, I think
What would you need?
you need
So this is Distillery. Hang on just to get my typewriter sorted and get my list ready. So this is Gordon Dundas' Distillery. How to stay a weekend's whisky road trip.
I think the first thing is that...
We could have talked all night, and of course we did. So we're going to draw a line just now on episode 2. Join us again for episode 3 of Whisky Unscripted, brought to you by E. MacLeod Distillers. Thank you so much for listening, and please get in touch.